Well, hey, everybody, welcome. Happy Sunday morning. So glad that you are joining us on Labor Day weekend, whether you're here in the room with us or you're joining us online from some glamorous location. We are thrilled to continue our series with you called Because I Said So. And if you missed Kendall's initial talk last week, I'd highly encourage you to go check it out. It'll really be the springboard that helps us talk about what it means to be present as not just parents, but if you're not a parent, maybe you're a caregiver for some kids. Maybe for you, you're involved in some other key relationships in your life where you could wield authority if you let yourself rather than influence and relationship. And so I'd encourage you to go find that at ehills.org if you missed it. The other thing that we introduced last week that you can find at ehills.org/weekend is something that we've called Growth Trek. And Growth Trek is really designed as a tool here at Eastern Hills to help you answer the question, how do I grow spiritually? And it'll give you the map to help you see what are your next steps in this spiritual journey of finding and following Jesus here at Eastern Hills. And whether you're at the trailhead, you're trying to just figure out how to get started, or maybe somewhere along the way you feel like you're at the switchbacks and you're doing a lot more work than you feel like you're making progress, but you are making progress. Or maybe for you, you find yourself in the wilderness and somewhere over the last year and a half, you decided to coast spiritually, or you feel like maybe you've taken some steps back, or your faith has just hit the back burner. We'd love to help you identify those environments here at Eastern Hills that would help you to connect with where you are spiritually and to keep moving forward. So if that sounds interesting to you and you're here with us on campus, you can find a QR code for it and a big picture of it in our lobby in the highlight area just outside the auditorium. If you're joining us online or in the room, you can go to ehills.org/weekend and click on Growth Trek. Just want to make sure you know that's there. You're going to keep hearing about it, and hopefully it will be helpful for you to be able to identify where you are spiritually and take a next step. Before we get started, I'm gonna pray for us. And if you've never been here before or never heard me speak, I pray kneeling. And the reason that I do that is because we are all in different circumstances. Some of you are grandparents, some of you are single, some of you are single parents, some of you have little kids. And being able to identify where all of us are in those moments and what we need to hear, that comes from God, not me. And God tells us that he speaks to us most clearly when we humble ourselves most deeply. So wherever you are, even if you're online with us, would you pray with me? God, thank you. Thank you so much that you do promise to give us wisdom if we'll ask for it. And so right now, God, we ask for wisdom. We recognize that no matter our season or situation, we don't know everything we need to. We don't know what's coming around the corner, but you do. Would you help us to see it? Would you help us to depend on you for it? Would you help us to grow through it? It's in Jesus' name, amen. Now, as we talked about this series, and maybe you've even noticed on the wall behind me at times, you've seen a picture of somebody with a megaphone, right? Because whether we want to admit it or not, lots of us have different areas of authority in our life, and if we're not careful, what we can do is we can sort of default to this place of formal authority, where we've talked about it maybe, we've tried to rationalize with a team member, an employee, a friend, a neighbor, certainly a child. And at some point, it just feels like they're not listening, right? And so you turn on the megaphone and you just think, I'm just trying to be louder. I'm just trying to be clearer. But every time we pick one of these up, every time we start talking through them, it doesn't help the person hear us. It actually shuts the conversation down. As a matter of fact, what I think we're gonna discover today is that we often let distractions create distance, and eventually we power up because of it. For some of you with teenagers, you actually don't feel like you've even seen your child's face in a while. You just see the top of their head as they're looking at a screen. And whether you wanna be honest or not, like they probably feel the same way about you. You just have more elaborate reasons for it. Yours is a work email. Yours is something you need to tackle, right? But yours is also Facebook. Yours is also Candy Crush, right? Distractions, they have this ability to create in us bitterness and resentment and frustration, where all of a sudden our goals about parenting shift, and the distraction can create in us a lack of patience for others. The problem is this, and I'm sure you've heard about it, there's been a huge uptick in the last several years around a problem called identity theft, where somebody will get a hold of who you are and they'll take that and they'll start kind of functioning as you in the world. And I have a little secret for you parents. You may not know this, but your kids will, if they're not already, commit identity theft against you. Here's what I mean. We all have things that we want to tell our kids and we want them to listen to what we say. They will hear what you say, but they will replicate who you are. They will actually follow your example, the good parts of it, and especially the bad parts of it. They are going to follow your model. A few years ago, when one of our oldest boys was in the car behind me in a car seat, somebody cut me off. And as they cut me off, I jammed on the brake, and just behind me, I heard, "What the?" And I thought, I wonder who taught him that. Probably his mom, And I never told him to say that, he had just heard that. The thing is, there are times in our life, even recently, where in the midst of stress and pressure, I need this. I'm not perfect at this. We all have moments, right? All of a sudden, school's back in session, and ministry and life is starting to look a little bit more full again, and we all have commitments and expectations and pressures, and all of that's piling on, and when somebody thinks they're more important than somebody else, and somebody doesn't feel heard, all of a sudden, the very same responses to a conflict in our home that I might give in a moment of stress or pressure, I see my 11-year-old give, or I see my 9-year-old give. And while I might want to be frustrated at them, really who I should be frustrated with is me. Who you should be looking at the mirror for of why your team members, your coworkers, your colleagues, your classmates, your neighbors, when they respond very, very poorly in relationship with you, you should look at the mirror and see if maybe they're responding in the way you would. Now, there's another piece of advice that I just want to help you with that I'm not good at. Someone mentioned this week and I think is really helpful. When someone is really frustrated and we go, I don't want to have to default to the because I said so. I really want this to be, let's slow down so that I can listen, because I really will listen. I want to know. And the way we do that is that when someone leads with emotion, you meet emotion with emotion. And someone leads with logic, then you meet it with logic. But I don't know about you, I'm a pretty driven, logical person. And so when someone comes at me with something emotionally and I feel like I can solve it logically, don't they want the problem solved? I don't understand. They don't, actually, that's the thing. And so what does it look like to meet people where they are? If it's emotion, meet it with emotion. If it's logic, meet it with logic, but don't overpower their feelings with your facts, because in the moment, well, you might be so interested in them getting it right, they really want you to know that they're not all right. And those two things can't always coexist. Now, last week, Kendall talked about how important it is that we're present with people in our lives, especially our families. As a part of our initiative this year, we talked about a couple weeks ago that we're gonna be God-centered and family first in this once-in-a-lifetime reset that we're experiencing. Because the pull towards performing and pretending that we're perfect, and that's all it ever is just pretending. It's gotten stronger and stronger, and if we leave it unchecked, it will put a pressure on us, our relationships, and our families that we were never designed to bear, and those relationships will crumble under the weight of it. Over the next few weeks, we're gonna talk about how we do that, how we show up as present. And today, we're gonna focus on truly listening to the people in our lives rather than just waiting for our turn to speak. And as I've already alluded to, I think there's a really important principle here that listening unites us, it unites our families, it unites relationships, and distraction divides us. Isn't that what we've all been experiencing? That as we've carved one another up and we've gotten more and more distractions in our life in more and more ways, we've just found ourselves more and more divided. So we're gonna look at a few questions coming from a story in the life and ministry of Jesus. And the first one of those is, what are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? This is a really important question because I think most of the time for us, the answer is kind of nothing. Especially if you're older and you feel like you can kind of control your time and control your money. But I don't know if you have a memory of this. One of the last times that I think it still kind of happens is when you're at the airport and your flight gets delayed or your flight gets changed. And especially if you're in a city you're not familiar with and you don't have friends there. And now all of a sudden you're just kind of stuck some random place in America, and you have nowhere to go and nothing to do. And you feel like, okay, what am I supposed to do now? And now I want you to think about that and go back with me for a moment, because not too long ago, there was a moment in human history where that same thing would happen, but you didn't have a smartphone to distract you, to rebook your flight, to be able to crush a bunch of candy, to be able to watch whatever thing you wanted to on any streaming service ever. You had to just sit there. You had to wait. The thing is now, we work pretty hard to not have to wait ever, anywhere. I don't know if this is you, but we live in this funny place where when we order Amazon Prime packages and they come in 3 days rather than 2? Like, we're mad about it. I don't know if you've ever done this. I did it this week. I filtered my searches through what could come as a free 1-day shipping item. Stop judging me. It's okay. You're like, I didn't know you could do that. You can do it. It's on the left side. We moved here from Seattle, and when we were in Seattle, there was Prime Now, which is amazing. You can get your stuff in as little as an hour. And here's what you thought. When you got something in an hour that you needed, here's what you thought. I promise you. You thought, I wonder how I can get this in 30 minutes. That's just how we're conditioned for it. We are not designed to wait in our culture, but there is something healthy about slowing down. Jesus shows us this in relationships. We're joining Jesus and some of his disciples as they kind of join in this really important moment in Jesus' ministry, where his popularity is basically right at its peak. The following chapter is what's referred to as the triumphal entry of Jerusalem, and it kicks off the week in which Jesus would eventually be killed. As a matter of fact, the same people who will be cheering his arrival will be shouting for his crucifixion in a matter of days. And Jesus had just corrected some of his disciples, some of his closest friends, for trying to lock in their kingdom position with Jesus without realizing the cost that Jesus would still have to pay and the true nature of this kingdom. They thought that it was about political power, when in fact it was something so much greater. See, the true nature of his kingdom, it wasn't trying to overthrow Rome, it was trying to overthrow sin. The fact that humanity had messed up to the point where it was irreparable. We could never get back to God on our own, individually or collectively. And so God, out of his love, sent his only son to live a perfect life on our behalf, to die in our place and to come back from the grave. So that because of that act of love towards you and me, that his kingdom, his eternal kingdom could be revealed and that you might be invited into it. And so asking for their seat at the table, he didn't think they understood what he meant. And in this moment in Mark chapter 10, we get to step into this moment of his ministry, and it says this, and they came to Jericho. And as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a great crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside. So as they're walking on their journey and sort of moving forward in ministry, they're walking through Jericho in a huge crowd of people. They've actually formed a caravan at this point of people who have heard about Jesus' ministry, of people who have seen Jesus heal people. And in the crowd, there was this blind beggar named Bartimaeus. And for the town, right, there would have been people there who knew Bartimaeus. They had seen him in the gutters. He was that guy that couldn't see, that was always asking for help. And people thought, why doesn't that guy just get a job? What's wrong with him? And it was actually worse than that in their culture. We'll get to that in just a minute. And even the people in the caravan that weren't from this town, they knew people like Bartimaeus from their own town. And they were trying to probably keep Jesus distant from him so that he might think good of them. In their culture, he would have had no status, kind of like ours actually, the way we think about homeless people. He was at the bottom rung of the social ladder and everyone knew it. There was no hiding it. They used it as an excuse to avoid talking to him, making eye contact with him, and definitely helping him. Not only that, but in this culture, spiritually, the way that it was understood was that if you had physical limitations like this, it was understood that it was because of your personal sin. It was because of consequences for choices that you had made, or it was the generational impact of the sin of your parents or grandparents. Somewhere in your lineage, someone had sinned against God and you were suffering the consequences of it. And Jesus was coming to make all of this untrue, was coming to show that everyone was created in the image of God with infinite dignity, value, and worth. Everyone was worthy of respect. But they didn't see that yet. See, it's easy for us even now, 2,000 years later, isn't it, to do the exact same thing with someone on the street corner asking for help as we drive by or walk by. But it's actually more complicated than that for us too, isn't it? We often ignore the people that are waiting around us all the time. Maybe it's the team member at work that just seems like they're a little too needy, or that neighbor that's always out front. Or maybe it's your kids nagging you about what's going on in their life and you're just like, it's not a big deal, and to you it's this big and to them it's this big. But here's the thing, if you wanna meet them in their world, you gotta at least meet them halfway. It's a really big deal to them. See, Jesus was about 20 miles of road away from Jerusalem when all this happens. And when he gets there, the week leading up to his execution would begin. But even with a task that important, he always had margin for people. He always made time for the people that others ignored, for the people that others overlooked. He genuinely cared. A couple weeks ago, we talked about reordering our priorities this year. And I think one of the big reasons for that is that we can make margin to recognize the needs of others. Remember, we talked about what it means to be God-centered and family first, and I used a container, and we took out all the rocks that represented priorities in your life, and we started with family first, and then we started putting other things in there. And at the end, we gave you a rock, and we said, what's the thing this year that you're not saying never to, but you're saying not now to? That if you're gonna be God-centered and family first, what's the hobby, what's the focus, what's the thing that's become a distraction that's dividing you, that needs to live outside of your life for this year if you really wanna take this seriously? And we had you write it down and give it back to us. And I hope that so far you've been trying that out. And maybe you tried it for a week and you've sort of like gone back to normal. And I'm gonna remind you a bunch of times this year to keep going back, to keep reminding yourself of that thing that God put on your heart in that moment, because that distraction is having a much bigger impact than you realize. Because everything that we say yes to in our life comes with some no's. Everything that we prioritize means that there are some things that don't get prioritized. What are some areas of your life that you need to make space for waiting and for those that are waiting around you? Maybe for you, you need to go to bed earlier. You're somebody that like stays up, you feel like it's your only time to veg, and you're binging some shows, and you know it's not helping you, and you're waking up every day more and more tired. Yours is simple, just go to bed earlier to be emotionally available. Maybe for you, you need to wake up earlier so that you can start your day. Like I have 4 kids. If I'm gonna get time to myself or time with God by myself, it's gonna come before they're awake. And so that means I have to go to bed earlier and wake up earlier so that I have some of that space in my life. Maybe it's showing up to the office before other people do so that you can get some of that critical work done that you can't be interrupted for, and you can be emotionally present with colleagues and coworkers. Maybe it's leaving for home earlier at the end of the day so that when you get back, there isn't as much pressure on your home. Maybe for you, it's so that your kids actually can see some of the best of you, not just get the rest of you, not just get your leftovers. Maybe it's that you need to get a better understanding of your financial situation. You need to realize that cloud that's floating over you, and you don't even log into accounts. You're just making minimum payments, and you just think it's gonna be fine. It's not gonna be fine. The truth can set you free. The truth can help you see what it is you really need to do. But all those things create this pressure on us that make us short-tempered, that make us impatient with other people, that create distractions. And the hard truth is that many of us say that we are interested in the success of our kids, of our colleagues, and our friends. But really what we want is we want validation for our contribution, convenience in our relationships, and comfort in our lives. That's what we want. And so oftentimes we ask those people primarily to serve those priorities, but those things become idols. Those things become areas that we're asking other people to sacrifice for. And all of those can become distractions if we elevate them. And listening, really listening to one another is what's gonna unite us, unite our families, unite our workplaces, unite our neighborhoods. And distraction is going to continue to divide us and break us further apart, which is what's happening all over the place. Second question, what's worth rejection? What's worth rejection? I think in our lives today, most of us have created pretty sophisticated ways to avoid ever feeling rejected. If you're an adult, maybe for you, you found your lane at work and you're pretty good at it and you kind of know what you need to do, or you've found a lane in a relationship. Maybe you're married or you have kids and you feel like that's kind of taken care of. And you just sort of keep everything else at arm's length so you don't feel rejection. But I bet I can take all of us back to a moment where we regularly thought about or felt rejection, and that's high school. Maybe you're a high school student and you can relate to this, but in high school, there is the sense of rejection that's sort of living seasonally in your experience, right? Maybe for you, you're thinking about asking somebody out and they're gonna say yes or no. Maybe you're gonna ask somebody to homecoming and they're gonna say yes or no. And it's really nerve-wracking, right? because you're not sure, you have no idea whether they're gonna accept your invitation or not. You're not sure if they've already said yes to somebody else. And this like sense of rejection comes with it, this idea of we're asking something that's worth the risk. And I think for a lot of us in relationships, what we don't realize is we are consistently having, especially kids, that will take the risk with us to be able to tell us what's going on in their life. And when we're distracted and when we're really not listening, what it does to them is it doesn't say that we don't care about that subject. It says that we don't care about them. That's how they receive it. And so with that in mind, the people in our lives, they feel this way all the time, especially when they approach us with excitement to share something that's really important, but it's not that important enough for us to care. And so we're listening, but we're on our phones. We're listening, but we're on the phone. We're listening, but we're in front of the TV. We're listening, but we're making a meal. We're listening, but we're folding laundry. We're listening, but we're not listening. And again, they don't hear that you don't care about that subject. They hear that you don't care about them. Being present is so much more important. For Bartimaeus, this had been a significant portion of his life. He would ask for help and people would reject him. Or worse, they would ignore him. And I don't know about you, but I would much rather someone just tell me that I didn't get the job, the deal, or the date versus ghosting me. But that never made Bartimaeus give up. The story continues this way. And we heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth. He began to cry out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he cried out all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Now, Jesus' reputation had been spreading exponentially. He isn't by the base of where he'd been doing ministry for the last almost 3 years. And the reputation was that he had taught like nobody had ever heard before. He was doing healings that nobody had ever seen before. And so now blind Bartimaeus responds in a way that feels unbelievably dramatic in the moment. And the scene that we're in is loud. In the Middle East, in the middle of the day, it's hot. It's noisy. It feels like chaos is happening all around him. And on the other side of the road, you have this blind beggar named Bartimaeus, somebody that would have been so easy to ignore, somebody that other people were telling to quiet down, especially this blind beggar who wouldn't even know the difference of whether or not people were making eye contact with him or not. But it didn't stop with him just shouting this simple statement, right? "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And if you've been in church for a little while, that just sounds like a thing that something, might read in the Bible. But actually, this is a really important descriptor because Jesus' earthly father is a guy named Joseph. He's a carpenter. He's not talking about Jesus' earthly father. He's talking about Jesus' lineage. He's talking about King David. And this idea, the Son of David, is pointing to the one day, someday, the Messiah that God's people had been waiting for, that would be the one that God would send to bring about hope for the entire world. The exact kind of mercy that he was asking for, that everyone needs, whether they're physically blind or spiritually blind or both, that they needed hope that only he could provide. But like we've seen before from Jesus' disciples and the crowd around him, and maybe we've modeled ourselves if we're honest, they rebuked Bartimaeus. He wasn't important enough. They told him to be quiet. They told him to get in the back. But there's this desperation here from Bartimaeus that he has nothing to lose. He's blind. He's probably had the best people available look at him, the people he could get access to, and nobody could help. And in this spot, it wasn't just that he was blind with the physical limitations that brought, it was the judgment that it brought, that he must have done something wrong. He must be a part of a family that's done something wrong, and people would avoid him because of it. Remember, for them, they had important things to do, important places to be, and important people to see. And Bartimaeus, he didn't matter. He was a zero in society. And the prospect of losing progress to talk to him didn't seem worth it to even bring up to Jesus, to even bring up the food chain to see if you wanted to talk to him. And I wonder, where do you go where people are waiting for you? And they have something to share, but you have no margin to hear it. And so because of that, we actually don't listen. We're always distracted. about what the next thing is, what's most important to us. For so many of us, we find ourselves in some sort of conversation, or you're running your kids somewhere, or you're in one meeting, and you find yourself waiting to return the call, to send the text, and then you get from that traffic duty with your kids to that next meeting, to that next responsibility, and you're playing catch up, and it's just that all day, every day, and you just find yourself at the end of the day completely exhausted. So the people in your life, especially your family, gets the worst of you. For me, it happens when I come into the office midday and there are messages waiting for me, emails to respond to, meetings to get to. But as I walk by someone's office on our team that I know needs help, that I know somebody who's feeling discouraged, I know that spending a moment, popping my head in, seeing how they're doing is going to be important. And it's my choice about whether or not I'm gonna create the margin to be able to do that. It's also when I get home at the end of the day and the kids and a dog, by the way, that I didn't want are waiting for me. The dog, I wanted the kids, I didn't want the dog. Our 2-year-old, Wells, he's our youngest. He started this thing now where sometimes I'll open the garage door and I'm going to pull in and he's literally just standing waiting for me where my car goes. You know, they have everything to say. Do I have every moment to actually hear it? See, when I have no margin, there's no listening. There's just sitting distracted in the presence of people who are talking. And you know it, and here's the thing, your kids know it. They know when you're not really there. They know when you're so depleted, so exhausted, so discouraged, so angry, so anxious, so frustrated, so scared that you have nothing to give them. So what does it look like in your life to change that, to really listen? Maybe it means you're gonna block out a day for a team member so that you can spend time with them on a personal level and not just talk about work. Maybe for you, you're gonna start having some date nights with your kids. We have a rotation where we have 4 kids. Each month, I will go on a one-on-one date with 2 of them, and Alyssa will go with the other 2, and then each month it flips. And you're like, that's a really cool idea, Phil. Yeah, it was Alyssa's, for sure. But it's really helpful, and it allows us to create margin, hours of margin, where I'm not on my phone and we're not trying to get work done, and I'm just like spending time across the table with somebody created in the image of God with infinite dignity, value, and worth that God's placed in my life to love and care for, that I get to hear about their world, and I don't care about all of it. I'm gonna be honest with you, but I care about them. And so I'm gonna care about that because I care about them. What does that mean for you? Because listening unites us. Distraction will only continue to divide you. And I know you're thinking, are you sort of overplaying this distraction thing? Is it really that big of a deal? I think it's even bigger a deal than I'm making it. The third question that we're gonna see in the story is a question that often comes up when people interact with Jesus, which is, what can Jesus do for you? What can Jesus do for you? For a lot of us, if we're honest, we actually don't even really know the answer to that question. We know something circumstantially that maybe we would want Jesus to improve for us, but the bigger question, we actually haven't spent much time thinking about it because we don't have margin to. The story illustrates it this way. In Mark 10, it says, and Jesus stopped and said, call him. And they, the same people that had just shooed him away, called the blind man, saying to him, take heart, get up, he is calling you. And throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. And Jesus said to him, what do you want me to do for you? And the blind man said to him, Rabbi, let me recover my sight. And Jesus said to him, go your way, your faith has made you well. And immediately he recovered his sight and followed him on the way. Jesus heard the voice of this man's desperation. He was listening. Even in the crowd, even in the busy, even with important places to be and important people to see, he still heard. And not only did he hear his desperation, he heard this unique title that he had referred to Jesus as the Son of David. I mean, I wonder what this must have felt like for Jesus, because he's got his disciples, these guys that have been with him for nearly 3 years. These guys that, for the most part, still didn't totally get who Jesus was. And now a blind beggar in a town where he had never been had heard what Jesus was saying, had heard what Jesus was doing, and was like, oh, that's definitely the Messiah. And out of that, right, he calls Bartimaeus over. And the disciples and the crowd, probably begrudgingly, go tell this man to get up. And at that moment, he throws off his cloak, which would have really taken whatever smell had been concealed and spread it to everyone around. It was hot, it was noisy, it was chaotic, and now it smelled terrible. And he gets to Jesus. And remember too, he's blind, so anyone that's in the way was either gonna have to get out of the way on their own, or he was gonna bump into them. This person that they would have considered untouchable was about to touch them. And Jesus asks him a question. What do you want me to do for you? Now, this is a crazy question, right? Because we're all like, Jesus, the guy's blind. Clearly, that's what he wants you to do for him. But here's the thing that Jesus was so good at. Jesus was so good at asking questions rather than making assumptions. And I think maybe we have something, excuse me, to learn from that as well. I think maybe we have something to go, you know what? Jesus, what does it look like for me to ask the question rather than to assume the answer in conversation or relationship? To be able to ask the question of that friend, of that coworker, of that neighbor, of our kids, of our spouse, of our grandkids. You might think you have the answer, but you might be surprised when you hear it. Bartimaeus responds by asking for his sight back. And it seems like a pretty simple prayer, but it's complicated, right? Because he's not asking for a lottery ticket. This isn't gonna fix everything. But even if he got it, he was willing to put in the work to be able to start putting his life back together. So Jesus healed him immediately, and Bartimaeus seems to just immediately join the group of followers. These followers that wanted nothing to do with Bartimaeus a few minutes ago, now they got to watch Jesus care for Bartimaeus, heal Bartimaeus, and welcome him in. And so now smelly, poor, awkward Bartimaeus was a daily reminder of how Jesus made time to stop, listen, and help people that others ignored. I wonder, what can Jesus do for you? Do you even have an answer to the question? Something deeper than just move that object out of the way, help in this thing at work, fix this deal at your house, solve this immediate problem with your kids. There are no distractions in your life that are worth you separating your family, your key relationships. And there are some distractions that we might need to have God help us eliminate from our lives. Maybe you feel overwhelmed by something that you just can't get out from under with your health, with your finances, with your relationships. What does it look like in your life to desperately seek God in that area? To not just sort of float up a prayer every now and then, but to make space and to make time and to make margin to genuinely ask him over and over and over again. And to realize in this over-leveraged life that we're all living, that every yes we give comes with a no. And in a book, Intentional Parenting, written by a guy named Doug Fields, he challenges us to think through whether or not our kids are getting more of our yeses or more of our nos. And if we're really gonna be God-centered and family first, we need to begin shifting so that our kids get more of our yeses. Less not nows, less laters, less I don't have time for that. More I'll make time for that. More some other folks in my life are gonna hear a no so they can hear a yes. Because listening, really listening and showing up for them is what's gonna unite you with them. It's gonna be what unites you with your family. And distraction is gonna continue to divide you with the people you care about most in your life. Now, this summer, for the third year in a row, I spent time fly fishing in Montana, because obviously I'm a super tough outdoorsy guy. You guys all knew that, obviously. And the last day that I was on the water, I was there with a guy named Andy. And I didn't totally know Andy. I knew a little bit about him, but over the course of the morning, Andy, who was a retired guy, had been really successful, literally just asked me question after question after question. He just wanted to know what it was like to be me, what it had been like to lead in ministry through this time, what was going on in my life and family. And if anybody's ever taken that much interest in you, it actually feels kind of weird. At some point, you're like, am I in a counseling room? You're like self-discovering as you're talking. And at lunch, we're talking, and I come to find out that Andy had done early retirement from a really large company that he had been wildly successful at. He'd been following Jesus his entire life, that he's a great husband, an amazing father, that his kids were grown-ups, functional humans, following Jesus with their own families. And I was like, wow, like this is amazing that you would want to know all this about me. And he just asked me, he said, would you want some like counsel or advice on any of the stuff we talked about this afternoon on the boat? I was like, oh, yes, absolutely. And he just spent hours having a conversation about what could really help change circumstances and help give me a different perspective in my life. It's a conversation I'll always remember. Because here's the thing, when we don't do that, when we don't slow down, when we don't make space for it, here's what ends up happening. We think that we're just trying to have a conversation. We think we're just trying to get our kids to listen. We think that we're just trying to make sure that we can be heard. That's all we hope for. But can I tell you, with people that you have functional authority over, every time you think you're doing that, every time you think that all you're gonna do is just make sure that they can be heard, especially with your kids, they don't hear that. They don't hear your voice getting louder, they hear this. And it shuts the conversation down immediately. They just heard, they don't matter. And if you're like, Phil, that seemed kind of like loud and a little inappropriate. I agree. So do your kids. So do your employees. So do your friends sometimes. Because it's about making space and setting these down and having the conversation, actually listening. And I know it's hard, so I want to give you some help to maybe be able to think about it. So here are a few tips if you go, what does this look like? None of these are profound. You will disagree with none of them. It's just the intentional part in times like this for us to go, I'm going to submit to Jesus in these areas of my life again. Number one, as you're trying to listen to somebody, don't multitask. Put your phone away. If you have small children, I would encourage you that in the evenings, when you guys have dinner together, hopefully, and you spend time together before they go to bed, put your phone away till they're not awake anymore. Turn off the television. Set stuff down. The dishes can get done in a minute. Get on their level. Actually listen. Number two, listen actively. We listen with our whole body. You know, when you're kind of zoning out and your kids are talking to you, they know that you're zoning out. Actually listen actively. Somebody gave me a piece of advice this week that's good advice, that when you're talking to somebody in your life, maybe it's a friend or a coworker, and you think they're gonna say something crazy and you're gonna have a hard time controlling your facial expressions, have your mouth open just a little bit, because it's easier to control it if they say something crazy, you know, like, oh, crazy thing, cool. And versus if you have your mouth closed and they say something crazy and you're like, you know, like that's, that does not create a safe context for a conversation. Number three, ask permission to share. Hey, can I tell you what I think about that? And here's the thing, if they say no, don't tell them. Because a lot of times I think we're like, can I tell you? They're like, no, I don't really want to hear it right now. Okay, well, here's the thing you need to know. I'm like, no, just don't tell them. They're not gonna be listening anyway. And maybe for them, they're gonna be ready in a day or 2 days or a week when whatever thing they're doing blows up in front of their face. Because again, you might wanna make sure they get it right. What they want you to know is that they're not all right. And those two things, you're gonna have to pick one of those priorities. Next, keep an open mind. You don't know everything. And when you assume the end of the conversation, when we don't model Jesus well, we assume what they think, what they feel, what they're going to do, but we might be totally wrong. Next, be honest. Be honest about your failings, your shortcomings. Be honest when you don't know the answer. That's okay. Next, especially in the life of our kids, normalize triggering topics. One of the questions that I get most often from parents is, when should I have the sex talk with my kids? And my encouragement to you, if you haven't been out to the family phase walls in our lobby, go check those out. Go look at the different phases and stages that your kids go through and what it looks like to have appropriate kinds of conversations on all these things with your kids. You should be having a version of the sex talk, I know this is gonna sound crazy, with your 6-year-old, with your 9-year-old, with your 12-year-old. And it's gonna be scaled, it's gonna be different. And we wanna help you with the tools to have those conversations. And some of you are like, I have a 15-year-old and I've never had this kind of a conversation on a whole bunch of things and I know, how do I deal with that? Well, great news, even though you haven't been talking to him about it, a bunch of other people have. So it won't be a brand new conversation to them. And it's not too late. It's not too late for you to start listening. Which leads me to the next one, listen to hear. Listen to hear, not to just respond, not to just wait for your turn to speak. Listen to hear. Some of you don't realize this, but your marriage is hanging in the balance of you choosing to do this. Your kids choosing to stay connected to you is hanging in the balance of whether or not you're willing to do this. And then lastly, build margin into your life. What are the things you need to stop saying yes to because they're coming with no's you didn't think about? What are some of the good things that you need to say no to so that you can say yes to the best things? In just a minute, I'm gonna pray for us. And I know that when we talk about this stuff, it's really heavy and it's really challenging and it requires stuff in our life to shift. And I want God to tell you what those things are. And so use this song to let him do that. Would you pray with me? God, thank you so much. Thank you for each person in this room, everyone that's joining us online. Thank you for the opportunities that we get to be reminded that, yeah, this absolutely can happen in our parenting. It can also happen in just about every relationship in our life, God. Would you help us to be reminded of that? Would you help us to understand the weight of that? That spouses in this room, God, that are like just begging you right now, that their husband, that their wife would hear this. Kids and students that are begging right now that their mom, that their dad would hear this, that God, we would even approach our kids asking for grace for how we've messed this up. That our team members, that our colleagues, our friends, our classmates, that they would see a different version of us, ready to be present by really listening. God, would you help us to do that today? Even as we pray and sing these words to you. It's in Jesus' name, amen.